Well, welcome to the top 10. I'm sure some of you have skipped straight to this one, and I don't blame you entirely. But just know that although these are my 10 absolute favorite games, there are another 90 that I talked about, 91 technically, that I also really, really like. So please check out those videos if you have the time. If you don't, welcome to my top 10. I don't have a theme for this one. The theme is these are amazing games, essentially. So we're just going to launch right into the 10th game and work our way up to my number one. So I'm sure there will be relatively few surprises for those of you who have been playing games with me for a while. Hi, monkey. My number 10 is Shadowhunters, which is up one spot on my list to climb back into the top 10. Its weight is about a 3 and plays approximately 5 to 8 players. Now, this is a game that I didn't own myself until recently. It was owned by my family, who I would primarily play it with. But I just thought that as they were looking to replace this with a game that was rethemed with a theme I didn't particularly care for, you can look up Fangs if you want to see it. I thought it might be a good time to get a copy that I actually enjoy, considering how highly I rate this game. Shadowhunters is a social deduction game that has like slightly more going on than your average social deduction game for like something like Resistance Avalon or Deception Murder on Hong Kong. This one is has you on teams. There are 3 potential teams, and this is part of the reason why you shouldn't play it at 4, because you only get 2 of the teams if you play it at 4. You have an equal number of shadows and hunters, and the shadows and hunters are trying to get each other. Their win condition is essentially to vanquish the other team, to knock their HP down to 0 for all the people on that team. Whereas there are also others who have their own special objectives, and if they ever attain their goal, then they win. So that's kind of what they're trying to do. But it's just the dynamics in this game that are excellent. A lot can happen. This is a game that is not about balance. It is very much about the experience and the stories that emerge from trying to play this game and trying to win. If you care intensely about everything being fair all the time, this might not be the game for you, simply because there are certain roles you can get dealt that are much harder to win with than others. There's also that element of, does your teammate know what they're doing? Have they picked the right people to try to attack, or are they attacking you because they think you're a shadow when you're actually a hunter, or vice versa? It's a delightful game. It's a thematic game that is sort of my token thematic game that I play, although I certainly enjoy social deduction games like this quite a bit. I just really miss playing this because I haven't really played it for a while. I would recommend it to people, maybe not if they're absolutely brand new to games, but almost in every other instance that they should at least try this to see if it's for them. This is absolutely not a game for everyone, but it is absolutely a game for me. So that is my number 10, Shadowhunters. My number 9 is Viticulture, which is a game that has kicked around the bottom half of my top 10 for quite a while. This would be specifically with the Tuscany expansion, although I have Essential Edition, which packs some of the Tuscany stuff into it, which is the version you can buy now, so that's good. But I would still get Tuscany Essential Edition at this point if you were to try to invest in Viticulture yourself. It is down 2 spots, so it's roughly in the same spot as it was before. Its weight is about a 7, so it's heavier, not the heaviest, and it plays 1 to 6 players reasonably well. It actually plays pretty well solo. I think I haven't personally tried it at 6, but I've played it at 5, and I feel like adding another player wouldn't be too much to ask for this one. Viticulture is very slightly my favorite wine-themed game that I play. It is also like Vinos, which is the other one I've talked about, at only 12, so these are pretty closely placed together right now, and it's possible Vinos could pass Viticulture. But for now, I have Viticulture more highly rated. It's the certainly more accessible, easier to play game. It's the game I would pull out in more situations. It does have some of those thematic elements of like aging your wine and things getting better over time, and then being able to ship them off for better and better things, and being able to combine different types of grapes into different kinds of wine. It's all like just a breezy, fun game. It's one of the games that I've invested in getting metal coins for, and I've certainly enjoyed playing it for that aspect. But if it wasn't for this being a game where it's about managing your luck, the luck of the cards, but you're also managing it in terms of if you are playing it properly, you are probably getting an influx of cards that will more or less push the bell curve towards the middle in terms of like everyone will be able to get something fairly workable if they're drawing enough cards. Yes, you could get extraordinarily lucky and get some good combinations off just a handful of cards, but most likely you're going to have to push to get some extra cards and then make your luck work on that. And the fact is, I think the luck balances out in that, whereas I think a lot of people think this game is very highly lucky in its nature, and I don't think so. I think it's just a game in which you have to pump enough cards into your system and finding the right balance of when you have enough to make it work. Because just the way the cards are structured, if the one card you draw isn't going to help you, the next card you draw probably will. So, yeah, so anytime it has that kind of element, it could go against you, but normally it won't, and I think it's usually the best player that wins. This is also a game I tend to win, so obviously that's true if I'm always winning it, because I couldn't be possibly winning because of luck, because when would luck ever go my way? But no, it's just a really solid strategy game that is in-depth without being overly heavy, and really easy to get played with the people in my family. It's just a smooth, well-rounded strategy game that I can come back to a lot like comfort food. I rarely have wine while I'm playing it, but I feel like I could, at least given the game's theme. So it's an excellent game. It's one of my absolute favorites, and like every game in my top 10, I've given it a 10 out of 10 rating, which has been me expanding my number of 10s that I'm giving from 4 to 10. So I can highly recommend it. I think this should be a game that you should be easily able to find for years to come. So there should be no problems if you want to give it a try to be able to track down a copy of Viticulture Essential Edition, and I highly recommend you do. And if you like it at least a little, you owe it to yourself to try it with the Viticulture Essential Edition stuff. I have the full box that has a bunch of stuff that's redundant with Essential Edition. That's just the Tuscany version, not the Tuscany Essential Edition. And also has some modules that people don't usually play with, and I don't usually play with, but it's nice to have them because I know I can basically play any form of viticulture that's out there right now. So that is my number 9, Viticulture. My number 8 is Puerto Rico, and this is down 4 spots. Its weight is about an 8, and it plays 3 to 5 players. I think there are 2-player rules, but I haven't dabbled with them, so I'm not going to try to recommend it at a player count that I haven't tried, and I don't think it isn't officially. Oh, it is listed on the box. Okay, interesting. So apparently that is in there. So let's just say it's a maybe for playing Puerto Rico at 2 players. I know there would have to be some changes structurally. Puerto Rico is a game I've liked for a very, very long time. It is the first game that I identified as I was getting into board games as my favorite game, as the one that I wanted to play most. The game that I probably played more than Puerto Rico at the time was Killer Bunnies, because it was a lot easier for me to get played with my family and the people around me, but I would occasionally drag a few of my friends into playing a game of Puerto Rico with me, and I always had a blast with it. It is a strategy game in which you are picking a role and everyone gets to do that thing. So if you play the mayor phase, that means everyone gets little workers that they can put on their plantations, or they can put on their buildings, and it activates those buildings so they do something. Or you could play the builder phase, where you all get to buy one building and add it to your town. And what makes this interesting is that you have to be careful about what you let other people do when, because sometimes someone's just got a ton of cash and they could get something really good in the builder phase. And so despite the fact that maybe you want to buy something in the builder phase yourself, maybe it's best to pass on that and do something else that doesn't benefit them. So there's that element. But there's also the element of, if you choose the role, you gain a benefit. So the builder phase, for instance, you get a coin discount. So it's 1 coin less, which can be significant considering that a lot of these buildings are 2, 3, 4, 5 coins a piece and not Yeah, and I think the most expensive one is still 10. So you can afford something maybe that's a little bit more than you would otherwise if you're the one to take that role. And then there's always going to be 3 roles that are unselected, because there's always going to be 3 more roles than are um, than the number of players each round. So every player will take one, and there'll be 3 left over. All the untaken rolls will get a coin each, which means that if you take it, you also get some cash, which is a scarce resource in this game. It's just a game where you have to balance a lot of things, and I think this was very formative in terms of defining the kinds of games that I gravitate towards early on. It is a game that I remember really enjoying for playing with the quality pieces at the time, which is kind of funny in retrospect, because this game can't compare to something like even Viticulture, which we just talked about in terms of the quality of its components, where it has all these custom cut bits and a lovely artwork. And Puerto Rico looks very middle of the road. Even this version, which has been slightly upgraded, you would have to take a look at the comparison between this and the original version. This also has a couple of expansions that I've heard are very good, but I haven't had a chance to personally play. But it's in this box, so I'm eager to have a chance to try them at some point in the future. It's just a really solid system, and I love this game. But it's also a game I just don't get to play nearly as much as I used to. It's fallen to 8, which is the lowest it's ever sat on my favorite game ranking. The previous point it was at 4 on my list last time, as my 4th 10 out of 10 that I was giving. It's still a 10 out of 10 to me. It's just a game that I think I have to accept is not going to get played more than every once in a while. But every once in a while, I get to play a game I absolutely adore. And that game is my number 8, Puerto Rico. So my number 7 is a game that is, unlike Puerto Rico, a really recent addition to my top 10, and a game that I'm head over heels for. This is Azul Summer Pavilion. I already talked about Azul, a game I really like, which it would have to be if it was in my top 100. But Azul Summer Pavilion is, I should say, it's up 2 spots from my last list. Its weight is about a 3, and it plays 2 to 4 players. So Azul Summer Pavilion uses a very similar drafting system where you take all of a single color of tiles, but it puts a little twist on that, where you also take, if you're taking all the reds but purple are wild that round, you also take a single purple, even if there are multiple purples on that tile. Same thing, they dump into the center the same way they dump into the center in Azul. If you take like all the yellows and purples are wild, you take like 3 yellows, and you take a single purple wild card as well. You take all of your tiles, you don't attach them to your board immediately. You wait until the end of the round, and then you take turns putting them on, which sounds like it may slow down the game immensely, but it just sort of adds a little bit of tension, because depending on how you place them, you're able to pick up bonus tiles from the center, which could be extremely useful to what you're trying to do. So it's just like the addition of wilds, the fact that the wilds change every round, the fact that filling in certain patterns will let you take bonus tiles, the fact that those bonus tiles are going to be differently valuable, the fact that you can store up to 4 tiles for future round without incurring any penalties, but no more than that. There are just a lot of little things that add interesting strategic wrinkles to a game that I already really liked. But this one is just so much more fun. And it also helps that, while the first one was very attractive, this one just has a much more, like, bright and shiny, like, almost a neon color aesthetic, with bright oranges, bright reds, bright yellows, bright greens. It just pops as you play it on the table. So it really looks like you're building something special. There's just so many little wrinkles in this game that are worth exploring and add depth to the game, that this is always the Azul game that I want to play. I will end up playing the other one primarily because it's the simpler game to teach and get people into. And I know I recently taught both games to a friend, and she much preferred Azul. But I also know she has a preference towards much lighter games on the whole anyway. So it wasn't a huge surprise. But I really wish it was more widely appreciated. Like, to me, it just seems like this is sort of been received as like, oh yeah, it's another really good Azul game. But I think it's so much more than that. I think it's like a massive improvement over the first game. And the first game was already a great game to begin with. This is just one of the best light games I could possibly play. And it packs a ton of depth in for a game that does not have a massive number of rules. If I'm reaching for a game to play with people that are uninitiated and I want something that I'm going to have a great time playing, this is easily one of the 2 or 3 games that I'm reaching for first. Amazing game. If you've played Azul and liked it, you owe it to yourself to at least try Summer Pavilion, because I think it's that much better. And just give it a shot and see if you agree with me. Anyways, that is my number 7, Azul Summer Pavilion. My number 6 is Targi. Targi is up 32 spots onto my list. Its weight is about a 4, and it's a 2-player only game. Okay. I don't know why I didn't try to play this game sooner. I had consistently heard good things about this, but this is a game that takes a few different elements and just condenses it into a distilled experience. It's a worker placement game, but you're worried about 2 different things at once. So it's already taking a mechanism I like and putting a twist on it, which is always something that I look for. You aren't just looking at the spots that you can go and what they give you. You're also looking at intersection spots between like what the vertical spots are doing on the top and the bottom, and the horizontal spots are doing on the left and the right. And where you draw lines from those, where those intersect, is where you will get a bonus in the middle. And that's the only way to get cards, which is the primary way to get points, which you need if you're going to spend the resources that you've been getting. Very interesting. It's very interesting that there are essentially 6 spots to take, or essentially 2 different versions of 6 spots. So you can take either the left or the right spot on one row, or the top or the bottom spot on one column. And then by doing that, you block that off, that entire column, from the other player. They can't take that column or that row. But there's only like 3 rows and 3 columns. So if you're doing that, you quickly run out of space quickly, and you only get to place one at a time. So if you're placing it on the column you need, and you're like, okay, they're probably going to take a row because they might be trying to block me. There's only 3 places they can go if they're going to do that. Are they going to take my spot? And that's early. So if you're looking for placing your 3rd worker to take another row or another column that you really need, the odds are much, much better that the person is, even if they don't intend to, going to block you. And then there's just a really simple resource management system where it's like there are 3 basic types of resource. There's money, which is a little bit harder to get. And then you just got to cash these in for cards, which will get you points and also sort of trigger the end of the game. You got to be prepared for losing things at like each quarter mark of the game, as you'll be required to surrender something, or you're going to be required to surrender points, and you usually don't want to surrender points because points are very precious in this game. It's just a really delightful system, and it's a game that is maybe not quite simple enough that I could play with anyone, but I could play it with more people than I could play a lot of other games in my top 10. It's terrific. I just tried an expansion with it, which is also excellent. I think I'd be happy to play with or without the expansion. I currently have in this box like everything I need from the expansion, and I put like all the stuff that's for base game only in the expansion box. So I only have to take this one with me. I think this has sort of been a weak point in my gaming library in terms of having games that are great for 2 players. I've had a lot of games that I like at 3 players or more, and that hasn't always been the situation of, I've had a lot of situations where I've only had one other person to play with. But this is kind of one of the games that's turned that around for me, so I'm very happy to have this in my collection, and I'm looking forward to playing this more. I don't know if it can rise much further than this. Like, this is already my 6th favorite game, but this has rocketed up my list because I just really like what's going on in this game. I'd recommend this to just about anyone. Once you've sort of dipped your toe in gaming, this might be sort of a terrific landing spot for a next step. Just go with the base game. The base game is fine for getting started with the game, and then expand to the expansion if you feel like adding more stuff and more options to the game once you're familiar with sort of the basics of how it works. That's my number 6, Targi. Okay, so I've got another game that jumped up my ratings, not by as many spots as Targi has, but this is my number 5, Brass Birmingham. It is up 7 spots on my list. Its weight is about a 9, largely because it's a fairly confusing game to understand how the different systems all work together and the little subtleties and nuances involved, and it is a 2 to 4 player game. I played this game with a couple of people who had never played anything quite this heavy before. They had played a number of modern hobby board games, but were kind of, casually into them and enjoyed some of them, but had mostly played lighter weight material, nothing much past like what I would consider a medium weight game. And they loved it. They thought it was excellent. They both lost, but it's often a sign of a good game that people aren't frustrated by losing. They're just so engaged by trying to play the game well that they just get into the game. And that's something that I think Brass excels at. I never played the original version, either the one labeled just plain Brass or the one labeled Brass Lancashire. If the opportunity came up, I would give it a shot, but I'm pretty content with this one. This is just an incredibly momentum-filled game. You are buying up territories, you are building factories, you are increasing your income by shipping goods, you are using beer to accommodate the shipping of goods, you are building waterways in the first half of the game and then railways in the second half of the game in order to ship things around. You are using different people's networks, you are using different people's resources, but sometimes they want you to use their resources because it gets their income track up and it gets their total number of points at the end of the game up. There are just so many little rules that you have to track that it should become burdensome, but I really find it doesn't get there, and I'm not sure why. It just feels like once you kind of understand how everything interacts with each other, the rules just seem to melt away, and what you're left with is this really interesting pile of decisions as to how you're going to try to go forward. And there's a fair amount of interaction too, because people can mess with your stuff, but it's not always bad. Some of those interactions are positive rather than negative, so that's something to recommend the game as well. I can see this game getting a little bit more cutthroat as people get better at the game, as I get better, and as I play with people that are a little bit better at the game. But I think it's a tremendous example of the kind of game I really enjoy. And it's also worked with people that aren't 100% guarantees that they will enjoy the kind of game that I'm presenting here. This is a new addition to sort of this top tier of games that I would be most excited about playing about, but I don't see this one exiting that in a while. Plus, I got the poker chips to throw around because I figure if it's going to be a game I keep playing time and time again, and I expect it to be that kind of game for me, yeah, why not have the upgraded components? So that is my number 5, Brass Birmingham. My number 4 is the only one I could see falling off my top 10 list and maybe off my top 100 altogether, and I'll explain why in a second. It is the Resistance Avalon. The Resistance Avalon is up 1 spot on my rankings. Its weight is about a 2 and plays 5 to 10 players. Okay, so the only reason why I might see this falling off is because I recently found a copy of the Resistance, which is very similar as a game to Avalon. There's a reason why this one is called the Resistance Avalon, because it's essentially the same game with a couple of little tweaks. It's almost like they included a mini expansion as the main game, and that's what you have here. This is the one I've played traditionally the most. The other one has expansions available for it, which I believe puts the stuff that is in this version specifically back in as an option that you can play with sometimes. So it's possible that this one drops off, not because I dislike it, I do in fact love it, but because that version may be more versatile, because I could add those elements in or out, or play with other expansion elements from the base version of the Resistance with other optional stuff that this version simply doesn't have. So that said, Resistance Avalon is terrific. It is a simple social deduction game in which some people are spies and you're trying to root them out, or if you're the spies, you're trying to cast suspicion on someone else. The problem is, one of the good guys knows who the bad guys are. All of them. So if you're playing an 8-player game and there are 5 good guys and 3 bad guys, I keep calling them spies, that's from the Resistance. They're called something else in Avalon since it's Arthurian legend themed. One person is Merlin, and Merlin knows who the agents of evil are. The problem is the bad guys also get a one-shot thing where if they know who Merlin is of those 5 good guys, they automatically win, even if the good guys took all the steps to winning the game, of saying, yes, we will send these good guys on this mission, these good guys on this mission, these good guys on this mission, we win. And then they're like, oh, David was Merlin. And they're right, and the good guys just lost. So Merlin has to help guide the team towards being suspicious of the right people, while simultaneously providing cover for himself and blending in and not being obviously Merlin. So that's kind of the level of this game, is like, it's not just who can you trust, but who's playing Merlin, who should we be trusting as the person who would be playing Merlin, and can you keep them from being too obvious that they are in fact Merlin so that the bad guys don't win at the end. That's a really intriguing element, and it adds some considerable spice to this kind of game. I still like let's see who's lying to me kind of games, or let's lie our faces off and see if anyone catches us. It's just this particular flavor is the one that clicks with me the most. So yeah, I might end up putting Resistance, if I get those expansions for it, in this particular game's place, but some form of the Resistance being in my top 10 or 20 is probably going to stick around for a while. These are some of my favorite experiences come from this game, and I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. The only thing that might change is it's coming out of the box that is just labeled The Resistance instead of The Resistance Avalon. So that is my number 4, Resistance Avalon. Okay, heavy box. This is Scythe. This is my number 3. It is down 1 spot. It is a weight rating of about an 8, and it plays 1 to 5 players. Technically, I have an expansion that will let you play 6 or 7 players. Don't do it. Scythe is a game that is not a worker placement game. I think that label gets thrown around a little too easily. But what it does have is some guys named workers, and then it also has a pawn that sort of functions like a worker on your own private worker placement board. Since there's no actual interaction, since you're just putting your pawn on your own worker placement board and can't put it on anyone else's, I don't consider that worker placement. But it is an excellent game. You're putting it on there to do a top action and a bottom action. The top action is usually something to do with the board, so you can move around, you can get some resources on the board, which you control as long as you've got units on that particular place. You can gain some money, gain some power, gain combat cards, all sorts of different things. And the bottom part is you can spend resources to upgrade your engine in some way. So that could be things like you could get additional bonuses. So you can get another combat card when you go for combat cards or something like that. You could get bonuses every time you or one of the player to your right or to your left does a particular action. All sorts of different things. And then there's just this combat element where it's the threat of attack is more palpable than the actual combat. And that's something I actually really like, because I like having to deal with the possibility of being attacked and of someone playing aggressively against me and having to prepare and build up against that. I guess I ultimately like Cold War aspects to games more than like Hot Wars of like destroying all your troops in a big flurry of die rolling. Even when you do fight in this one, there's no die rolling. You just spend some power, but secretly, and you spend some combat cards secretly, and you reveal, and whoever's got the higher total wins. That's fine. That works for me. It's just it's just very deterministic here, and it's a little bit of like trying to double think the other person. It's a Euro game with some war game elements, some Ameritrash style game elements. And I think there are some people who think the ratio is closer to 50-50. I think this is closer to 80-20 in favor of being a Euro game. And maybe that's just because I don't tend to play with people that are particularly aggressive. But this is also just an incredibly beautiful game with a very evocative art style. I have the metal coins for it, which is actually something fairly common among the games that are in my top 10. The miniatures look beautiful. The board looks beautiful. There's this very sudden element of the game ending like right now, as soon as you hit a certain threshold, and then you have to count score, and the person who ended it isn't necessarily going to be the winner, but they often are if they are gaining some big bonuses on their final turns. If I had to pick something that I don't like about it, and I'm not even sure I dislike this, why does it say it's 115 minutes on the box? Not 150, 115. Why don't you just say 2 hours? Like, is it going to be 5 minutes less than 2 hours when you play it? It's not even that bad of an estimate. I just wish they had just said it's a 2-hour game. Fantastic. One of the easiest games that you can get me to play, and one of the games that I think I'll be playing for years and years to come. That is my number 3, Scythe. My number 2 is Keyflower. Keyflower is up 1 spot on my list. Its weight is an 8, and it plays 2 to 6 players. Keyflower is probably the game that has the biggest gap between how much I like it personally and how likely or rather unlikely it is that I will actually get to play this game. It is an uphill battle to try to convince people to play this game. Often the times that I've played it have been when they're with people who don't really have any sort of investment in tabletop gaming at all, and therefore are like, sure, I'll play that game, because they don't have any particular bias for or against any type of game. And often I usually want to introduce those people to simpler games anyway, so that doesn't even happen that often. Keyflower is excellent, but it's a combination of a couple of things that sound like they shouldn't work together. It is a worker placement and auction game, where those two elements are deeply intertwined. They're not just an auction element over here and a worker placement element over here. No, it's your workers are also the currency with which you auction. You can place a worker on a place and it stays there, and it means that if you play red, only red can go on that tile. So if someone else wants to play on that tile, they now have to play 2 red workers, and then they get to use the benefit of that tile. But you can also bid for tiles, and there's 4 rounds, and you bid for these tiles, and they come into your village if you win them. You put them on the side, and again, if I put a red worker on top of the tile to use it. Someone else can bid for it, but they also now have to use red. So there's this limiting factor, considering you're starting with red, yellow, and blue, and there's a fourth color that can come in that's rare called green. I called green because you don't know what green means. Yeah, it just gets heady. It's like, okay, do you want to use the worker to use the spot and gain its benefit, or do you want to use it to try to win it so you can get it later, and get it later into your village? When people use that spot, because other people will be able to use that spot in future rounds, but you get to keep their workers, so you can gain some workers to use for other things. There's quite a bit going on, and it's kind of abstract, and it's just also one of the most interesting and different puzzles. I can't think of another game that feels quite like Keyflower. I think they did a re-implementation called Key to London or something along those lines, but other than like direct re-implementations of this game, there's really nothing else like it. And I just think that this is one of the most fun combinations of mechanisms that I can find in board gaming currently. I just wish people would be more willing to play it. I can accept that I am a bigger fan of this than a lot of other people around me, but I really think people should just give it a try, at least, you know? Like, get as far as having played the game before you tell me that's a game that you don't want to play. But oh well, that's just my life. I'm sure someday I will find a large bastion of Keyflower players and I will ride off into the sunset blissfully. That is my number 2 game. My second favorite game of all time, Keyflower. It's amazing. Please give it a try. My number 1 game of all time is Terramiska. Terramiska was my number 1 game last time I did this list. Its weight is about a 9, and it will play 2 to 5 players. I don't even quite know what to say about Terramiska. Terramiska is my number 1 game, and it's not that close. Keyflower is fantastic. I still like Terramiska a lot more than I like Keyflower. It is a game that I have played dozens of times, which is unusual for a game that routinely clocks in at 2 or 3 hours of playtime. It is a game that I played with my family. It's a game I played with gamers. It's a game I've played with a wide variety of folks, and it's almost always gone over well. I know a few people who don't particularly like it, but they tend to be somewhat in the minority on the whole, because for the most part, people are just excited to play a game that just sort of snowballs as well as this game does. You start being able to do only a few things, and you get to put out a couple buildings and do a few minor things, but by the time you get to the 4th, the 5th, the 6th rounds, you're doing a ton of things, and usually it's just getting people to realize, oh, they should try to specifically target the things to do in those rounds that actually get you points. That's the trick. Instead of just like doing things because you have the resources to do them now all of a sudden. That's a little bit of an adjustment to make in order to get there. But there's just so much depth to this game. I mean, I started out being able to barely get like 90 or 95 points in a good game. And like I've been able to hit like 145 points in a live play of this. I've done more in a digital version, and that feels like that's been a massive change. You've got a grid. You are going to places, but you can only go to your own color. So you know, if you're the Chaos Magicians, you can only go to the red scorched earth kind of places, which means you have to spend resources to change to terraform it into something different. But you're just given a lot of options on ways to go about that. You can spend magic points to cast spells that will magically turn the terrain into your type. You can spend workers to do it. You can try to upgrade your terraforming ability. So although you spend like a bunch of resources in order to upgrade your terraform, you now spend fewer resources per terraform level that you move. There are special powers for 14 different races in the base game and more in the expansion. Fire and Ice, which I do have. I don't have the other expansion yet. I may get it. There are so many different ways to play it, and the strategy changes so drastically depending on sort of how you set up the game each time and what the conditions are for what's going to give you points and when. When is the time to pursue things for points, and when is it better to try to do things to just like get your economy going? There's so many crucial decisions to make. There's so much going on that is interesting, and everything just flows together. When you've got like 3 or 4 people at a table who all know what they're doing with Terramiska, it just flows beautifully. You feel like you've accomplished a ton over the course of the game, and there's just there is very little that I dislike about this. I'm trying to think of anything that pops to mind is like I don't particularly like it. The only thing that comes to mind is that I wish this had a solo mode. I would definitely play this a lot solo if that was possible, but unfortunately that's only available in its direct sequel and the sort of inspired by version in Gaia Project and Clans of Caledonia. I'm not saying you should absolutely play this because it's pretty heavy, but I think you should give this a try with me if you ever have the chance. That is my number 1 game of all time, Terramiska. So that was my number 10 through 1, my top 10 absolute favorite board games of all time. That was a blast to go through, and I am very excited to have finished going through all of these games, and I am excited to see what the reaction is once I finish uploading these, and everyone gets to see what my top 100 looks like in its full list. If you have any comments, if you want to let me know what you think, please feel free to contact me or just leave a message at the bottom of this video. And until next year, when I probably do this again, and until I perhaps begin using this channel for other purposes, I will see you later, and have a good time gaming. Bye.